Hello and welcome to another edition of What Does the Giraffe Say Media with me, Kathleen Ratorne. We're an organisation that aims to connect people in conservation and the animal world by holding live interviews on social media. Today, I am very happy to be joined by Jeff Kremer, and he is a big cat and animal advocate. So Jeff, I'm going to hand over to you. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know your career was not always focused on animal welfare. So if you could talk to us a little bit about what caused the switch.
Sure. Both my wife and I spent 20 plus years in the corporate world, but we'd always been animal advocates. And so when, the corporate world was wonderful, the pay was great, the benefits were great. But it wasn't rewarding. After 20 years, it was for the company and not for the person. So we wanted to more align our careers with our personal dedication to making a positive difference in animals' lives, which we'd done for many years. And so we both embarked upon careers, what we thought would be a dream job in the zoological world at our local AZA accredited zoo in Tampa. And learned the hard way. It was a 4-year lesson, but about 2 years in, it was a hard lesson for us to learn that, zoological organizations are businesses. And a lot of times when you start butting heads between the operations side and the animal caretaking side, there's a lot of compromise with regard to animal welfare and human safety. And so, of course, being altruistic, we tried to make a positive difference within the zoo, and that wasn't welcomed in the good old boy zoo world. Yeah. And so we extracted ourselves from the zoo world after a number of negative events that just repetitively, systematically kept happening within the zoo world. Loss of animal life, human safety, and we formed a grassroots advocacy outside of the zoo to expose them for what they were, the imperfections and what needed to happen within. And it rattled the cages within the zoo world to the point where the zoo sued us to stop. And so we had to hire an attorney to navigate those waters, and continued on our mission, and just empowered us. You can't defend wrong, so we just wanted to present information and empower the public and let everybody make informed decisions and do good for the animals. And so that led us through the zoo world and into the sanctuary world, which was more aligned with us, which was making a positive difference. Sanctuaries are still a business, but they are definitely more focused on animal welfare and that well-being. And the business side is second. You have to have a good business model to fund a sanctuary, but doesn't mean you have to compromise animal welfare and quality of life or human safety. So that's how we kind of navigated from corporate to zoological to sanctuary. And then due to health issues at the time, I'm pleased to say we're cancer-free now, but I we both left Big Cat Rescue. After a number of years, I was their director of development and or donor appreciation, as we called it in the small world. And my wife was a part-time education director there. And we've continued our mission towards making a positive difference in animal lives in any way that we can. And that really led us, I never had a plan to do what I'm doing, but it's a privilege to be able to be a voice for the animals. And I'm grateful for your invitation to represent what we do through your organization, which is just a beacon for animal advocates around the world.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and we really appreciate the work that you guys are doing as well for these animals. You mentioned it there when you were talking about how you kind of became very disillusioned by what was happening in the zoos, and that there was a risk to human safety and the animal safety as well. What kind of common issues were you seeing, and have people started to make changes in the zoo world, or are these still an ongoing issue?
Yeah, so the issues that concern me most, because I was involved in management and in security and in several different departments, the issues that concern me most is it was not unusual for us to have an animal escape once a month. We called them Code 1s. Code 1 was an animal escape. Code 2 was a human in an animal enclosure. And so it was very disturbing that was the systematic issue was animals were getting out due to enclosures that were built with flaws. And when you did that, you know, both the employees and the public were put at risk. In some cases, animals lost their lives. We had a Sumatran tiger, a beautiful Sumatran tiger named Inshallah, that got out due to human error. And the CEO of the zoo at the time actually came back at the end of the day and actually, because she had breached her enclosure into the public area, he shot and killed her with a shotgun because the darting didn't work. You know, people don't realize that, you know, they see, I called it the other side of the zoo. What the public sees is very different from the operation side. So I encourage people that go to zoos, you know, and we've become, we're not zoo supporters, but I've got to say that AZA accredited, if you have to go to a zoo, AZA accredited zoos are the best of the best. You know, they have flaws, but if you're going to go to a zoo, AZA accredited are certainly the ones to turn to first. But still within them, there are many flaws, and we've become a loud voice. I think one of the biggest flaws I see is their ambassador animal programs, and we can talk about that later in the film. But so within the zoo, it was the animal escapes, which led to human safety concerns, and animals being put down. There's we had at the time, we had over 2,000 animals on 50 acres. And I mean, think about that. Most of the animals are not endangered. They aren't serving a part of the species survival plan. So it was just, you know, it was an important part of our evolution as animal welfare advocates. You don't know it till you know. So until we lived and walked in those shoes in that career at the zoo, we didn't know the things that needed to be changed and improved. And when those were rebutted and they didn't want us to help make a change, then we left the zoo and, you know, joined the sanctuary and empowered ourselves even more.
And I think as well, as you say, it is like you're kind of pulling the curtain back and seeing what's behind the scenes. So for those watching back home and they might not be too sure, what is the difference between a zoo and a sanctuary, and why would one be better than the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the whole business model of zoos is captive conservation. That's it. I mean, that's you were breeding animals, you were presenting animals, everything in your business, raising fund, everything is about breeding animals primarily for captive conservation for the rest of their lives, so that future generations of humans can go see whatever species it is in a cage. What that's the big flaw in that is it's doing nothing for the animals, and it's doing very little proportionally for the animals in the wild. A sanctuary, you know, if it's an accredited sanctuary, and most, you know, the good sanctuaries are GFAS accredited, Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, or the Big Cat Sanctuary Alliance. A definition of sanctuary is you don't buy, you don't sell, you don't trade, and especially you don't breed. A true sanctuary doesn't breed animals, because breeding animals for captivity is doing nothing for their counterparts in the wild. And certainly a sanctuary is not going to allow the public to interact with the animals hands-on, and that's a big definition as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important for those who do want to visit these places, is to make sure that they are following all these guidelines, and then you know it's actually a legit sanctuary that you're going to, and not just one that calls itself a sanctuary to make itself look good, but actually doesn't follow the best practices. We have a question coming through from Leslie. Hi, Leslie. Always lovely to see you on the show. And she's saying, can you explain the difference between the AZA and the ZZA and the SSP? If it is still the SSP, will the animals really go back into the wild?
So was that the AZA and the ZAA?
Yeah, Z.
She was asking about?
Yeah. So what's the difference?
So sure. So the AZA is Association of Zoos and Aquariums. They're, you know, they tout themselves as the gold standard. And I have to say, you know, I'll get on my soapbox and say that I'm not a zoo supporter, but you know, zoos are going to be around. So you need good people working in good zoos. So my philosophy is good accredited zoos do far more good than harm. But that being said, they still need to evolve, and we're here to hold them accountable and to make sure they evolve as fast as possible. So the AZA is the gold standard by their own definition. The ZAA, I actually was around in their inception back in about 2004 or 5. It's a Zoological Association of America. And they actually started out primarily as a group of private owners and organizations that their mission statement was to defend the ownership and propagation of exotic animals, and they've fine-tuned themselves over the last 5 to 6 years. But if you go to their website, there's AZA has about 240 members. ZAA has about 65 members. And if you go to the ZAA, the Zoological Association of America, and look at their members, they look like primarily a bunch of roadside zoos. The scary thing for me is, and I haven't been able to define why they're allowing this, but the AZA has been allowing some of their members to co-accreditate with the ZAA. So you'll find probably about a half dozen zoos right now that are AZA accredited that are also ZAA accredited, which does nothing for the AZA except make them look bad. And it does everything for the ZAA to make them look like, hey, look, we've got all these prestigious zoos from the AZA, and they're part of our organization. When the ZAA standards are much lower with regard to everything, animal welfare, husbandry, caging, safety, everything. They are just, their bar is here, and the AZA's bar is up here. So I don't encourage anyone to partake or be a patron of a ZA accredited zoo. It's a lower standard of zoological process. Now, both of those organizations deal with SSP, Species Survival Plan, or Species Survival Program animals. The AZA does it on a far greater basis and a much more dignified and respectful basis than the ZAA. I mean, you have organizations, and one we exposed in the film, Conservation Game, Tanganyika Wildlife Park in Kansas, is a well-polished, prolific breeder of just about every species of animal you can speak of, including most species of cats, but their standards are horrible compared to AZA standards.
Yeah. And if it is the SSP, do the animals go back into the wild, or do they spend their lives in captivity still?
Yeah, so the AZA likes to tout the SSPs, and they are respectable breeding programs, and they track every animal from birth to death. They know so that there isn't any inbreeding going on or crossbreeding. It is a legitimate breeding program to sustain that particular genetic species of animal, but 98 or 99% of the time, none of those animals are ever intended to go back out in the wild. There have been maybe a half dozen occasions when a small number of condors or some other endangered species have been re-released back into the wild, but you're never going to find an AZA accredited zoo or a ZA accredited zoo putting an African lion or a Sumatran tiger or any of those species back into the wild. So primarily species survival programs, 98% of the time, those animals are bred specifically to keep that genetic line pure as possible for future generations. They sometimes tout that they'd like to be able, with the potential of putting it back in the wild someday. And it's simply not going to happen. That's not what zoos do.
No, I agree. And I know that you were saying that you've spent a lot of time working with these animals that are in captivity, and you've kind of been using your knowledge then to try and ensure that if they are going to be in captivity, then at least they have some kind of quality of life. What kind of stuff do you do here to ensure that they do have a better kind of standard of life and conditions?
Yeah, for any zoological organization, AZA, ZAA, I won't discuss the roadside zoos because they just aren't there for animals. They're there for profit and for ego. Enrichment, quality of life is all going to go back to operant conditioning and enrichment. So any good organization, and almost every good zoological organization and sanctuary has an extensive, comprehensive operant conditioning enrichment program. So that's just enriching the animals' lives, and that can be through treats, it can be through behavior training, it can be through obviously better enclosures. I mean, the big flaw to captive conservation is the fact that it's a cage. You can make the cage as pretty as you want, or the enclosure that the zoo has as pretty as you want, but putting a lion or a tiger or an elephant out in a small yard, or the elephants maybe in a 1 acre yard. I mean, compare that to the 100 or 200 square miles that they would roam in the wild. It's captive conservation. That's the flaw. It looks pretty, but people need to take their blinders. The public needs to take their blinders off and be aware that this is just a pretty. You can't replicate Mother Nature. You can't replicate planet Earth. So you can do the best you can, and you can keep those animals as healthy as possible. But it's simply not a substitute for animals in the wild.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And then, is this sort of the information that you're finding out and you're trying to help? Do you then advise people on this and go to different organizations? Is that part of what you do as well?
Sure. So from my time at the sanctuary, I extensively would do a lot of public speaking to all types of organizations, businesses, colleges. I mentored our college students at the University of South Florida in Tampa at the time. Knowledge is empowering. That's another one of my mantras. Knowledge is empowering. We're all going to make the best. We're not going to make a right or a wrong decision. We're going to make the best decision when we're empowered with information. So absolutely, education is key. So everything that I have learned, everything my wife and I have learned, we've spoken for years and continue to do, through public speaking and presentations. We travel all over the country. Our hope is, by sharing our personal life experiences, both in the zoological world, the sanctuary world, what we've encountered, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then empower people with information that allows them to make the best decision. And that is going to be, again, with information, and hopefully there'll be a better voice for the animals. Listen, we were up, my wife and I were 40 and 41 at the time when we left the corporate world and went to the zoo world. We knew nothing about it. It just was a pretty zoo. And then working it, we were grossly impacted by the stark reality of the business of zoos. Going to the sanctuary world, it empowered us again to make better. But we were 40, 41 years old at the time. We knew nothing. We didn't know people were keeping lions, tigers, and leopards, and bears, and all these exotic animals as pets. So how, at college educated at, say we were 45 once we got through the zoo world, how is it that we were college educated and knew nothing about this? And we're well intended. So that's our goal, is to say there's a lot of people, most likely like us, out in the world that know nothing about these institutions, therefore not allowing them to make the best decision for themselves or for the animals. And so it absolutely all goes back to education.
Yeah, completely agree. And then, I mean, it's a topic I've touched on with a few of my other guests as well, so I'd love to kind of hear your view on it as well. But I know, obviously, with COVID, a lot of the world went straight into lockdown and people weren't able to leave their home. It was a very unnatural environment, both kind of mentally and physically for humans. Do you think that's kind of helped people to look at zoos in a bit of a different way now, and for them to appreciate that, that it's not an ideal environment for an animal?
Yeah, my hope would be that, but I think the reality is people need to be exposed and empowered with information before they're going to make that leap. So people, I follow all the zoological institutions, and as a result of the film, all the people that are using these ambassador animals on TV and elsewhere. And it seems to be the habits of the people are like they're flocking back to the zoos. I mean, flocking back to the zoos. So my message to them is, maybe to help them make that leap of information and faith, is all these organizations offer behind-the-scenes tours, and the sanctuaries do as well. They're more limited, but they offer the behind-the-scenes tours, and I really encourage the public to take the behind-the-scenes tours, whether it be a zoo, a sanctuary. Research them, vet them out online, make sure that they're not, cuddling. Nobody's cuddling with any baby animals. But I really think that the mindset of the general public is, they just want release. They want to see happy animals. They want to smile. They want to go have a good meal. So they're just, it's an entertainment venue. It's SeaWorld is an AZA accredited zoo. Six Flags, these places, Busch Gardens is an AZA accredited zoo. They're amusement parks, but they have exotic animals. So there's a a fine line that has been compromised there. I don't think the general public COVID has affected any major positive change in their philosophy. I think people are going to need to see it with their own eyes, and that's through a behind-the-scenes tour, which I've encouraged for over 10 years during my tenure through the zoo and sanctuary world.
And I think that's the thing, is it? A lot of people go with the best intentions and they love these animals, and they don't actually realize that their love is fueling a lifetime of these animals being held in captivity. We have a question coming through from Sadu Muhammad Ali. Hello, always lovely to see you. And he's saying, what state in America has the most population of captive animals, and what kind of animals are you seeing?
Yeah, sadly, and so as you're well versed around the world with these conservation issues, I don't even tackle some of the conservation issues with regard to other countries exploiting, Australia and the UK and especially in the Asian countries exploiting exotic animals, because we got to clean up our act in the United States of America. I mean, we have an abomination of the exotic animal trade in our country, and so we're going to. My philosophy is we need to clean up our own backyard before we go, trying to call others out for their actions. So in the United States of America, the exotic animal trade is horrific, and it's it's guesstimated to be probably about, I think, a $2 billion industry, second only to the illegal gun and drug trade. So just roadside zoos abound. I mean, just thousands of them in our country. I focus pretty much on the exotic cat issue. So, for example, a statistic would be that there's more captive tigers in Texas and Florida combined than all of the wild left in nature. I mean, by far. So that the best guesstimate in the United States of America is there's between 5,000 and 10,000 tigers in captivity, with the majority of those being in Texas and Florida. But these roadside zoos have every species you can imagine. And take it away from the roadside zoos. I mean, when we talk about ambassador animal programs, I'll just give an example. Pre-COVID, the Columbus Zoo had an ambassador animal department that employed 25 people and had over 200 exotic animals in their collection. Now, that's everything from reptiles to the cats to the primates. So it's a wide spectrum. In our country, sadly, if somebody can make a buck off of it, they're breeding in it, they're exhibiting it, and it's the two core defining factors that lead to the exotic animal problem in our country are ego and money. Either somebody's making money off of exploiting an exotic animal, or they're feeding their ego, or both. But those are the two common denominators. But I sad to say, I mean, I couldn't even begin to put a radar on how many roadside zoos there are in our country. But exotic animals, my personal and professional belief is the reason we have this problem is in the United States of America, at least in most parts of the world, animals are considered property. So most of our laws and regulations are based on property. So like, God forbid, in our neighborhood, if I ran over the neighbor's dog, it's the only thing I'd be held liable for is to buy them a new dog. I mean, there's no value to that other than a piece of property. So until we change the laws around the world, and in our country included, and make those laws apply to sentient creatures, we're going to have this issue where people breed and collect exotic animals as property to exploit them to make a buck.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that kind of feeds quite nicely into my next question as well. And I know we actually had Tim Harrison on the show a while ago, and I know that you worked quite closely with him on the award-winning documentary, The Conservation Game. Can you talk to us a little bit about this documentary and what your role was within that?
Sure. So I when I left, I retired from Big Cat Rescue, and we moved up to the mountains in North Georgia where there's not a lot of great internet bandwidth, and I never intended to be in a film or work for film, but I was connected with Michael Weber, who I've been informed was going to create a documentary to expose the nefarious world of ambassador animals and the faux conservationists that were exploiting them on TV and special events. And so my initial role in the film, when Mike reached out to me, was to be their research person to help. We needed to define who we were going after as far as tracking these faux conservationists and what animals we would track. And it was about Mike and I just lived virtually for probably the first year and a half, 2 years. I mean, he was in Ohio and I was in Florida at the time, and we lived virtually 24/7, 7 days a week, better defining what we were going to track and go after. And about a year and a half, 2 years into it, Mike's like, I really think the audience might be interested in learning how we're tracking these animals and how we're finding out where they are and how we accomplish that. And so that was the point that he decided to bring me into the film, about midway into the film process. So we could show, through the tiger striping, or how through social media posts, or through all these other ways that we were tracking the cats that these faux conservationists were exploiting on TV. So it was really, it was right up my alley. I'd always been into internet research and web developing and things like that. So I'm a little OCD with retentive, being able to research things quite quickly in the internet. And that's how I got involved and continue to this day. So while the film is out there, and I have to give a big shout out to Michael Weber and Tim Harrison and Carney and Nasser and Keith Gadd and Russ Muntz and Cy, my teammates, because without them we couldn't have put this together. But to this day, I'm still tracking all those faux conservationists. I track where they are, what animals they're bringing around, and it's an ongoing mission.
Yeah, it's such an important one as well. So thank you so much for all the effort and the time that you've been putting into this. You touched on it a little bit earlier as well when you were saying, the people that are having these animals, there's big egos and there's big money. So I assume they're not very happy with you when you're exposing them. Have you had any concerns and fears when you're kind of revealing to the public the actual reality?
Yeah, I mean, we knew going in, just like when we left the zoo world and exposed them through a grassroots advocacy campaign called Tampa Zoo Advocates, we knew we were going to be putting ourselves at risk. And certainly we were at risk when we exposed the zoo for what was going on. They sued us and we had received personal threats. And with regard to Michael Weber's film, The Conservation Game, what's been interesting is that most of the faux conservationists have stayed completely on the sideline. They have not uttered a peep. I'm talking, other than the Columbus Zoo making a public statement, there has not been one notable faux conservationist, including Jack Hanna and Dave Salmani and Boone Smith and Jared Miller and Grant Kemmerer, not one have issued a peep. And nor have any of the public institute, the media companies, whether it be ABC, Disney, Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, none of them have come off the sidelines either, which is very disappointing as an animal advocate, because these faux conservationists are saying, hey, these are the organizations that we are representatives of, and we have standards, meaning they and the organizations have standards, and nobody has uttered a peep in a year and a half. So that just, it's time for us, Jack Hanna, with all due respect to the issue of dementia, my wife and I have lost two family members to dementia. It was kind of timely that when the Conservation Game made its world debut at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, the next day, Jack Hanna's family comes out with a public announcement and says that he's, retiring from public life due to advanced dementia, possibly Alzheimer's, and will be making no more public appearances. And we respected that. The film's not just about Jack Hanna, it's about all these other individuals. It's about a bigger topic, which is animal welfare. But fast forward in the last year, I continue to track Jack Hanna, and I've, on more than a half dozen occasions, have documentation of him hiking the mountains of Montana, going out to private concerts, going to birthday parties, stopping to take selfies and talk with people in stores. So I think it's really disrespectful and disingenuous that they would claim that he has advanced dementia, rapidly progressing advanced dementia, and won't utter a peep or try to defend, what he's been called out for in the Conservation Game movie. We hope that at some point in time, and we'd like to be able to ask him, like, what happened to these cats? Yeah, these were your cats that you exploited on TV, and we were anticipating that when the film came out, we would have that opportunity to hold these people accountable for their actions, and not one of them has uttered a peep, which tells me two things. One is they're afraid to, because two, they have nothing. There's no way to defend themselves. You can't defend wrong. Michael Weber has crafted such a fine documentary, and believe me, that's why it took over 4 years to make, because every T is crossed, every I is dotted. You can't debate what we've exposed in the film. You can discuss it, but you can't debate it, and that's why we think that none of these people, none of these celebrity conservationists have come off the sidelines. But we're gonna push them off the sidelines, because these animals have a legacy, and we don't want that legacy to be lost.
Yeah, I completely agree. And if you haven't watched it back home, then I absolutely recommend watching The Conservation Game. It is very eye-opening and shocking, and kind of blows the lid off what people have been putting undercover for so long now. What do you find is your biggest challenge, Jeff? And then kind of how do you combat those?
I think the biggest challenge in life oftentimes is apathy. So I think until you are able to engage the public on any issue, it doesn't matter what the issue, apathy is our greatest obstacle. And so it impassions me to be, I self-taught, I get up on a soapbox. Life's short. This is a unique experience, a unique journey we call life. And I believe we have a responsibility, ethically and morally, to be a voice for the sentient beings that can't speak for themselves. And I will not be ashamed, and I will not be deterred or denied in being a voice for the animals. So my goal is to continue to be able to, through this venue today, this wonderful, this social media medium, to be able to empower the public to make, again, not a right or a wrong decision, just the best decision. And so that's done through education. And so I will continue to be the voice, and hopefully, I'm working with several PhD graduate students. The film has really led to some really interesting side projects that have involved everything from Siegfried and Roy to the Zanesville Massacre to zoos to ambassador animals. So, I'm using the universe will direct me to where I need to be next for right at this moment. You can't look at these animals' eyes that are either in a zoo or a sanctuary and feel like that's the answer, captive conservation. And again, I truly believe we have friends that are still working in AZA accredited zoos across the country. We need good people in those zoos. And so I applaud them for that. What we found is that we're part of both the operations and the animal care taking sides, and we did butt the heads. So we learned those heartfelt lessons. But I truly believe that the animal caretakers, they were just like us. They're 98, 99%. They would give their lives for those animals. They did, and they do. But then on the other side, the operations side, it's all about that buck. It's all about making the dollar. But when you look at many of these zoos have become amusement parks. And so I think they've become strayed from their mission of, if your mission vision is to basically for the sustainability of endangered wildlife around the world, then you should be spending a majority of your gross annual revenue on projects that actually do that, not on building another flume ride or not on opening another, water park amusement. You heard many zoos begging and pleading during the COVID pandemic, and I believe them in the beginning, right? I believe that they definitely hurt fiscally, but you look how fast it was, almost like once a month or even sometimes twice a month, that these zoos, these AZA accredited zoos, were announcing another 10 or 20 or 50 or $100 million building project to build an enclosure that would hold another 6 animals, right? Like, how's that going to help the elephants in the wild? Or how's building that gorilla habitat it is going to make a wonderful habitat for those 4 or 5 gorillas, but what is it doing for the gorillas in the wild for the sustainability? It's not. So I really think that if they're going to walk the line and tout themselves as the gold standard, zoos need to be spending and dedicating more of their gross annual revenue on actually conservation projects that are taking place in the wild, and not just putting lipstick on it, actually putting the majority of their funds. I mean, the average zoo is only probably dedicating at most 5% of their gross annual revenue on actual conservation projects in the wild. They should be, in my opinion, should be donating, 40 or 50% of their gross annual revenue toward projects in the wild, not spending it on pretty habitats. They're going to house these animals for the rest of their lives in captivity, so your great grandchildren can see an animal in a cage instead of actually trying to save the habitat in the wild. And that boils down to, the greatest threat to all of life on planet Earth, including humans, is loss of habitat. So let's start there. Let's focus on saving habitat. Let's then focus on funding the rangers that are protecting the wildlife within those habitats. And then if you solve all those world problems and you want to have a good zoological organization, whether it be a zoo or a sanctuary, don't breed for captivity. And certainly it's a fallacy to believe that, when people go to zoos, they see the picture. But I mean, like if we had 2,000 animals at our zoo in Tampa, and there's some very big zoos that are similar to that, the majority of animals in all zoos are not endangered. They're not part of a species survival plan. They're just breeding animals to have babies so that the public comes to see the cute baby animals. And that cycle continues, but nobody asks, well, where do all those animals go? I mean, you can't have 2,000 animals and multiply that times 240 AZA accredited zoos, and where are all the baby animals going when they become geriatric? You run into a surplus problem. They aren't keeping them. You don't keep that many animals, so it becomes a network of how it's really interesting to read the acquisition and disposal policies and procedures of all the zoos, AZA accredited, ZAA, and it's disheartening, and that's why captive conservation is not the answer.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You're absolutely right. Okay, so I've only got one more question left, Jeff, and then we'll start to wrap up. If you've got a question and you're watching back home and you'd like to put it to us, pop it in the comments section. If you're watching this and it's not live and you do still want to ask a question, do please still pop it in the comments section, and one of us will do our best to get back and respond to you for that. So I like to always finish things on a bit of a high, Jeff. So I'd like to know what your favorite success story is.
Yeah, and I love that. That's just such a wonderful question. And I'd say in the zoological world, I don't have a success story other than me being empowered. In the sanctuary world, wow, it happened every time we made a rescue. Every time you could look a sentient creature in the eye and take it out of a deplorable condition and provide it safe haven for the rest of its life, it brought me to tears every single time. I mean, a great story from the Conservation Game movie was one of the tigers in there is Nola, a white tiger that was rescued, and she was near death. And she now for a couple of years, I think it is now, has been out at lions, tigers, and bears, one of the finest sanctuaries in the country. Bobby Brink's facility out in California, lions, tigers, and bears. And Nola made it out there. And if you go to their website or their Facebook page and just Google Nola, she is big and beautiful and happy and has a companion and is enjoying a quality of life that it takes my breath away. So I have a number of personal favorite stories, but really it was every time in the sanctuary world, and it didn't matter if that rescue resulted in only that animal being with us because it had been so abused and exploited that it only was with us for a month or a year or 10 years. It was the fact that you saved it from that deplorable condition, the conditions it was being exploited in or kept in or confined in, and you gave it enrichment, you gave it, a quality, protected life for the remainder of its life. And it wasn't going to be bred, it wasn't going to be petted, it wasn't going to be toted around on a leash. And And so those are my the success stories are anytime you can rescue an animal. And that's why we really need to pass the Big Cat Public Safety Act, because that's going to eliminate private ownership of exotic cats in the United States of America. And it's making its way continually through the House and the Senate. It's a bipartisan bill for the first time in both houses. It was discussed in a subcommittee this past week in the House. We would like to get it voted on the Senate, on the House floor, and then get it through the Senate. It's a bigger challenge, but I encourage everyone to go to Big Cat Act, bigcatact.com. They will, in literally 2 minutes, be able to contact their representative, their legislative representative, and be a voice for these sentient cats that can't speak for themselves. So that's really the answer is we have to, I'm not a big proponent of over legislation, but when it comes down to sentient animals, we need to protect them. And the Big Cat Public Safety Act will do that. And we need the public support right now.
Yeah, I've just pulled up the website. Thank you, Jerry, for messaging that site. So if you're watching back home, you can see the site there. So then maybe you can go and join and try and push this act through. Awesome, Jeff. I've had such a lovely time talking to you. We've had really nice comments as we've been talking. Lots of people giving lots of wonderful support and thanking you for the work that you do. We've had people watching from Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, America, Scotland. Absolutely lovely to see everyone from all the different countries around the world tuning in and doing your little bit to support. So thank you, everyone back home, for watching. Is there anything that you'd like to say to before we say goodbye?
No, you're a breath of fresh air. You and your organization, it's sometimes we in the animal welfare world feel like we're alone, and so it can be quite isolating and can be daunting. Like there's no solution to this. But then when you gather with the like-minded people that are all around the world, and in Michael Weber's film The Conservation Game, we were streaming and on demand and on broadcast in 10 countries before the U.S. And the U.S. has just been a different challenge because the people we exposed in the film, the faux conservationists, they're the spokespeople for all these big media companies. So there was a lot of fear for supporting this blockbuster documentary. Luckily, we didn't back down from it. We will not back down from it. And I'm just grateful that like-minded individuals around the world as I like to say now, collectively, we will not be denied or defeated in being the voice for these sentient animal friends that cannot speak for themselves.
Yeah, 100%. And it just goes to show when people do join together, good things can happen and change can happen. And it goes back to what you said earlier about apathy being one of the biggest issues. I think a lot of people are also a little bit too overwhelmed at times and think that a small thing won't make a difference, but small things can lead to big changes. So never feel like that it's not enough.
Real quickly is to touch on that is absolutely. If you look at the whole battle, it's too big, it's too intimidating, it's daunting. But if you treat it one sentient creature at a time, you make a difference. So start that way, and as one of my colleagues in the film, Keith Gadd in the film said, you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so start with one sentient creature and then move on and help others.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on. Thank you, everyone back home, for watching and all your lovely comments. Really appreciate it. If you've liked the show, please do give it a like, comment, and share. The more people who see it, the more awareness we can raise for the people who are doing these great things in conservation. But for me, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Jeff, for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much, Kathleen. Appreciate it.